Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this week's podcast. I'm delighted to have David Roberts, the CEO of Verra Mobility. David and I have had a great chat already on so many topics of the vulnerability of a CEO, the mistakes that we make and things that don't go quite right, but also what you learn along the way. And he's got a great model in his father, who was an entrepreneur and an example to him of how to be a leader. But David, welcome. It's great to have you on the
Yeah.
show.
Oh, thank you so much. It's great to be here.
Yeah, and do tell us about what Verra Mobility does. That would be really
Sure.
helpful.
So we are a global leader in smart transportation, which means that we have technology and services for our customers in the category of transportation. And what that looks like is a portfolio of businesses that span around 17 countries, where we work with local governments around safety, and we do that through automated enforcement technology. We work with commercial fleets around access to things like toll roads or parking. We do most of that in the United States, but we do some of that over in Europe as well. And then we work with universities and cities around parking. So how to get into parking garages, how to pay for parking, how to make sure people aren't parking in the wrong place at the wrong time. And we do that mostly here in the United States. So we're publicly traded on the NASDAQ. We operate in 17 countries and about a $4.5 billion market cap.
Fantastic. Well, look, congratulations. And how many guys are you leading as the CEO?
We currently have around 1,900 employees worldwide.
Yeah, it's a lot. It's a lot of people, and
Yeah.
it must be quite difficult to get around and touch the lives of all 1,900 people.
It is. I was joking with my wife recently. I said at some point, I hope God will show me how many hours I've spent going to an airplane, waiting for an airplane, or on an airplane, because I spent a fair amount of time with American Airlines.
Yes, I mean, I think God looked at you and he laughed and he said, "I'll make this guy responsible for transportation and I'll make his life traveling as
Yes, that's
difficult as
exactly.
possible
Yeah,
with as many
exactly.
delays and cancelled aircraft as possible."
Had
Yeah,
a 2.5 hour delay last night getting home. So yeah,
yeah. Well, look, it's nice to see you looking so fresh in spite
yeah.
of that. But it is interesting that the trends in traffic and all that's going on. And my wife and I have got two electric vehicles. Our
Mhm.
daughter and our son have got electric vehicles. Our other two daughters have got petrol driven. But it's everything is just at the moment seems to be stalling a bit because there's a sort of backlog of a lot of electric vehicles on the hire companies, and they've got a bit burnt on that. And the infrastructure for recharging and charging vehicles isn't quite there. What do you see is going on in the industry?
Yeah.
What's your quick overview for me as a layman?
Yeah, I think there was a not uncommon to what happened in the dot-com era, where there was all this new technology, investors and private equity and public markets got super excited. We probably pushed it well ahead of its real application. And so electric vehicles is no different. So we've had customers that bought an enormous amount of electric vehicles and they're having to sell those now. And the reason was there was probably a more pragmatic approach, which is, hey, let's build infrastructure, let's get federal funding, let's go a little pragmatic steps of progress so that people can then feel comfortable charging their vehicle. And the reality is customers, in particular in rental cars, they're not familiar with driving an electric vehicle. They're not familiar how to charge it. They didn't realize it would take so long to charge. And so I think all of it's going to be electric over time. I think it's just going to be a little bit of a slower progression to that. And I would say slower, meaning 20, 30 years probably just to get there.
Yeah, and are we going to see, do you think, some of the big trucks with sort of hydrogen and that kind of stuff? Will we see cars with hydrogen, do you think?
I don't know about, I would say definitely the trucks first and maybe even electric trucks first. I think the technology that might start to go more in trucking is the autonomous is probably the more exciting area where there's a real value proposition for fleets to have autonomous fleets. They're a little bit cheaper to run, and especially if they're electric. So I think that might be something. But again, all those are going to be in the sort of 1 to 2 decades, not 1 to 2 years.
Yeah. We're speaking, I'm here in Grantham in England, and I thought you'd either be in Charlotte or Arizona. Whereabouts are you? Where are you
Yeah,
today?
we are. You can see in the backdrop, I'm in Mesa, Arizona, is our corporate headquarters. So we operate here in Mesa, Arizona. I've lived here now for 20, and up in Scottsdale for about 21 years.
Yeah, well, it's a nice part of the world, and
Indeed.
I always enjoy my time over in the States. But look, I'm fascinated in my role as a coach to CEO and executive teams to meet different CEOs and hear their life story and who they've learned from. Your father was quite an influence on you. We'll
Hmm.
talk about him in your origin story in a minute, but also who are the CEOs that you'd like to give a call out for, who are serving CEOs at the moment that you find inspiring, and what qualities do these two people have that you want to shout out?
Yeah. The one that comes to I've been really fortunate to work alongside a lot of entrepreneurial CEOs. Um, and my very first CEO job was working for a guy that was also a CEO. His name was Carr Bettis. And he was the founder of a company that I ran called Equity Methods. And this is one of the more brilliant people that I'd ever met in my life. PhD, and I think maybe multiple PhDs, very successful private investor. And what I found, what he really taught me was this real balance of performance as well as integrity. He just had a real care and concern for others and the people that worked for him that I thought was an incredibly generous man. He was one that I worked for that I thought was fantastic, and he and I have stayed in touch, and that was well over 15 years ago now.
Mm.
And then another, I guess he would be effectively the CEO, a guy that I worked for that at the time was the managing director at Bank of America. He now is the head of Citibank Wealth Management, a guy by the name of Andy Sieg, Sieg. And Andy was, boy, what a great guy. He had a high level of engaging the team, really positive, great sense of humor. But boy, was he rigorous. He really taught me to walk into a room to be prepared, because if you weren't prepared, he would very quickly find out when you weren't and be able to expose that. But and did it in a positive and encouraging way. But I found Andy to be a really great leader that I still stay in touch with today.
Well, that's great. Well, look, it'd be fascinating to meet both of those guys as your guests
Absolutely.
at some stage. But let's talk about life as a CEO. And how long have you been a CEO now, David?
Yeah, so I've been here for 10 years, and prior to that, I worked at two smaller companies with a bit of a break because we sold one. So I've probably been an operating CEO for about 15 years.
Yeah, that's a lot of experience. And
Yeah.
we were laughing about the fact that you occasionally meet some arrogant ones who go, I
Yeah.
can't think of any personal mistakes. But you were saying, yeah, I have made a lot of mistakes, but hopefully I'm learning from them. What would you pick out as, I think we were talking about one about a hiring call,
Yeah.
which is a problem for many of the CEO clients I have, that it's really hard to get hiring right because
Yeah.
they've polished themselves up. They've made a
Mhm.
CV that is almost libelous. It's so inaccurate with all the stories that they've told themselves about how wonderful they are and how they, as one person said, I remember in one interview, he was when I was in the military, and he was saying how wonderful he was. And this other guy said, so while you were saving Western Europe, what was the rest of NATO doing?
That's great.
But yeah, in making poor calls on hiring, what was your lesson that you learned from there?
Yeah, I think if I were to look back just broadly on mistakes I've made, I would certainly look at, I'll bet, and I think other CEOs, it was almost always people related. It's not as often the business decision that we made, but the people decision. And that could be, I had someone, I carried someone longer than I should have, or I brought someone in and they were just the wrong fit. I've had both of those happen. And I think in general, everyone likes to think they're a great recruiter and a great talent identifier. And I certainly think that if I look at the success of my career, it's because I've had great people around me. I have definitely made mistakes where either I was too eager to hire because the role had been open for a long time, or I just got, uh, I just wasn't as rigorous in the interviewing process to make sure what people were presenting. To your point, Jonathan, people are awesome in interviews, especially the more seasoned in career, to make sure that what I'm getting is exactly what is really a direct fit to the role that we're getting. And as they say, you hire slow and fire fast. And I think that is a good axiom to maintain.
And the opposite of that is um, uh, was it that old saying, marry in haste, repent at leisure? If you rush into it,
Yeah,
you spend longer.
exactly. Exactly.
And I think about you having a gap And there's an amazing lady I had on the show, Philippa Snare, who was working, she's chief marketing officer at Facebook, and she's now senior vice president at the trade desk. And Philippa Snare's a really great leader. And she said, Jonathan, I'd rather have a hole than an asshole. And
Yeah.
and she said, don't
Yeah.
rush in and try and fill the hole. Take your time
Yeah.
because it's so difficult to unravel it, and this it's so costly. But also, I was listening to an interesting guy I'm having on who's from Google, and he was saying in some of the better companies, they have a much quicker way of going, this hasn't worked out. You're only 3 months in. You may not even need to put this on your CV. Let's here's a month's salary, go.
Yeah.
And having that kind of arrangement, because as you said, so many leaders have said to me, you know, someone put it in this way when I had this problem, Jonathan, what is it you know now about this person that you'll find out in 12 months' time? And I went, she'll never make it. And he said, so why are you dithering, delaying the decision for another 12 months? I know you've tried to get well program and help them along and coach them and all this kind of stuff, but it's just not working. And when are you going to admit that you made a mistake? And that's okay. We do make mistakes, but to not admit you made a mistake and plow on, everybody else around this person suffers,
Yeah.
and everybody thinks you're weak because can't they see how this person's pulling the wool over their eyes and they're not working well? And then they feel demotivated because you've got someone in there who's dragging their chain, their anchor along the
That's
bottom and
exactly right.
not speeding ahead.
Yeah, I had a mentor years ago, and I didn't realize this candidly earlier in my career, which is he said the first time you think you should fire someone, you probably should.
Mm,
And I don't know that that's always true, but I think the point was when you start to have that feeling, I think it's time to lean in very quickly. And I think always people need to have an opportunity to just go back to, hey, are you clear on expectations? Are you clear what the values and behaviors of the organization are? And but as soon as you have that sort of tummy, it's kind of your tummy is telling you something about someone, it's probably the time to lean in very quickly. But we as leaders, and myself included, it's so easy to look the other way on that. Hey, let's just give them time. Hey, they're just starting. Hey, but as leaders, the further in your career, especially, and the higher the role, the creator of the impact of a poor hire is really significant time, cost, energy, and culture. And I think that there should, I hope, myself included, leaders need to act a little bit more quickly and decisive when they find something that's out around there.
yeah, you are so right. Very wisdom from lots of experience, I'm sure. And I remember when I was in PricewaterhouseCoopers, working with senior leaders on their behalf, and we did some research. And when you hire someone, it takes them about 18 months to get up to the level of performance they were at in their last job when they were doing a good job. Sometimes it can be 3 years.
Yeah,
So actually, the team is going to take a dip with this leader for quite a long time.
absolutely.
And are you really prepared for them to suffer and go backwards so far when actually it's probably better to call it early and go, look, let me be radically candid with you. This is not working. We've
Yeah.
talked things through. Not, and it shouldn't come as a surprise to them. Time and again, I had a CEO I was talking to the other day. He goes, "Yeah, my first job, I thought I was doing a great job. Everybody's telling me I was doing a great job, the board and all the rest. And then suddenly they were, this is not working. You need to leave." And he goes, I just didn't see this coming. And actually, that's the CEO's fault if they haven't seen it coming and there's been no conversations. Because I was coaching a CEO the other day, and he said, "Yeah, I don't want to be too hard on him, but it's not working. He's not. I've been saying things to him, but he hasn't kind of got the message." I said, "How honest have you been with him?" "Well, he might crumble. He thinks about it a long time after I've talked to him." And I go, "But he's not getting the message, is he?
Yeah, that's right.
So whose fault is that?" He goes,
Yeah, exactly.
"Okay." So I'm really avoiding, because I like the guy and I want him to succeed, and he's got a family and children, and all those things are important, but you're not a charity. And
Exactly.
and even if you are a charity, which my wife is the CEO of a charity, she's still, actually, with charities you have an even difficult time because they go, "I'm a good person. I'm working
Yeah,
for a charity, but you're not doing any work. Yeah, no,
that's
but I'm a
right.
good person. I'm giving my time for free.
Yeah,
Yeah, but you're causing chaos. So actually, people in charities have an even harder time because they go, I'm
indeed.
a good person.
Oh
Um,
yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
you
one of
have
the
had
things
a
I have.
you had a very interesting upbringing. I want to go into your
Yeah,
origin story, David,
yeah,
because take me to who influenced and shaped you into the leader you are
yeah.
today. Tell me a bit of your story.
Yeah, so I grew up in Marietta, Georgia, which is a town just outside of Atlanta, and I was raised by my mom and dad and a sister, and I had an older sister. And I think the real influences, my dad was one as I was growing up until I was probably maybe 10 or 12. He was a sales guy. He sold vending machines. He sold oil to gas stations and things like just kind of a random food supply, sort of different jobs. Um, but he was a good sales guy, probably one of the better sales guys he'd ever met. Became a sales manager, and then eventually he got into the time management space, and you and I will remember this, Jonathan, but maybe some of the listeners won't remember that they used to have seminars with these books, these planners that you would go to 4 hours and you'd learn how to do your to-do list and your calendar and things like that. I suspect they might still do those, but you don't see them nearly as often anymore. Uh, and he was an entrepreneur. My dad was the first guy to actually, that used to be a multi-level marketing industry in the early 80s. He was the first guy to say, hey, let's go sell this to a corporation. And so he started selling IBM and Coca-Cola and all these on doing seminars for their managers to make them more productive. And he built up a really nice business that ultimately got sold to Franklin Covey.
Yeah, yeah.
Which, yeah, so people would
And you do
probably,
know that I had Stephen Covey Jr.
yeah, we
on
talked
the
about that. That's
podcast,
right.
episode
I'm
299.
sure this was so long ago. I'm sure
Yeah,
Stephen
yeah, I
Covey has
remember.
a
Yeah, yeah,
recollection
yeah.
of it. But yeah, and I think the reason, so one, he was a great sales guy. He built a company, was a very good leader. And so the real underpinning was what did I take from that? Because, and I'll talk in a second, unfortunately, his life ended much too shortly. He was a very faith-based, purpose-driven leader and was unwavering in his commitment to that and candidly quite unapologetic about that's how he was going to live his life. That's how he was going to run his company, and he was going to have no apologies for that. So that means that he hired people, men and women, to work for him that shared values. And I think those shared values allowed his company to be really, really successful. And I learned the power of that early on.
Yeah. And look, you were 23 when your father
Yeah, so when I was
died.
20, well, I was 21 in college when he was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And I think nowadays that's probably not nearly the trajectory of a disease that would happen today. But this was in 1990, yeah, 1990. And he, unfortunately, he succumbed to that in 1993.
Oh, I'm really, really sorry about that. But what a legacy he's left
Yeah,
behind.
absolutely.
Um,
Well, and then to maybe just, I'll just find our story on that is I had a chance to speak at my dad's funeral.
wow.
And when I got there, I got up to the podium at the church, and I looked up, and the church was completely filled with all these people that I had no idea who they were. And I later found out that these were ministries or charities or people that he had had an impact on in his life because of that sort of purpose-driven approach. Because at that point, I had no idea. I just thought my dad was a successful business guy. I wasn't leading that way in any way, but that was sort of my kind of what I call my control alt delete. When you do that on the computer, you sort of start over. That's when I was like, oh, there was something different. And then I started to partner with some of the men in my dad's life, kind of took me under the wing to help me teach me more about that and mentor me as I progressed in my career.
That is very special to have those
Yeah,
people as mentors to you. And
indeed.
and I'm always curious because I did all those courses. I had the binder with all the different pages in, and I
Yeah,
loved it because with someone like I think it was in my military background, you'd have to pack your we call it the webbing, this kit you wore around you, little pouches, and everything
yeah,
was miniaturized, and so these miniature books and filofax and all these kind of things with these pull out planners and stuff. I would spend hours doing that. But do you think looking back with the benefit of hindsight, and I use a time management app now, Todoist, which I think has come from,
Yeah, that's what I
yeah,
use.
yeah, and it's actually pretty handy. And it's good because it's on the different phones and things. But do you think, looking back of all that kit and all those plans and things, did it actually make people more efficient, do you think? Did it actually add benefit? I mean, I hope it did, but
Oh, absolutely. I absolutely agree. I mean, so many people come into these, I mean, even today, and they don't even have any system or structure of how do I get things done. And maybe more importantly, not getting stuff done, but getting the right things done. So more of a priority management system versus just a task management system. And if you go on YouTube today, there's all sorts of videos of how I plan my day, how I organize my day. Follow me. I did this for 30 days. Those are still very popular. So obviously the problem is still there. But I would say for me, at least personally, it did teach me that my calendar and my to-do should align with my goals, which was something I learned. My dad was very insistent on it a very much earlier than when I was in my 20s. And given that, I think that was at a minimum, some reflection of the opportunities I've had in my career are reflected because of that sort of alignment.
yeah, and I'm looking here on my wall because I find sometimes it's great having it on your phone and things like that. But actually, here on my wall is my priorities about
Yeah.
how I lead my life, with my wife as my quality time with my wife as my first thing, our 4 children, our 2 grandchildren, my brother, to love and support them, our fitness and health, relaxing time, mental well-being. I'm
Yeah.
off on a Buddhist retreat for 11 days next week. And that'll be a good challenge to
Oh my
my
goodness.
mental well-being. Silent Buddhist retreat. Not that
Oh
I'm
wow.
Buddhist, but it's going to be.
Good
And
luck.
then clients and podcast guests and winning new clients. But then at the bottom, shed 80% of what I do every year and be world class as a leadership advisor and team coach. And I think it's always helpful to have those goals and the priorities. And then you go, how does it fit? This has come in. Someone's asked me to do this. Where does it fit? It doesn't actually fit. And I think this idea of shedding or saying no in a polite way. Someone taught me once, and it resonated for me. I don't know whether it's relevant for you, David, but just like my heart says I'd love to do this, but my
Hmm.
head says I'm looking at my diary. I am rammed. So actually, if I say yes to this, I'm probably saying no to my wife or to my grandchildren or my children because it's going to be eating into my evenings or my weekends. So thank you for the request, but the answer is actually no.
Yeah.
However, I recommend you chat to this person. So you don't leave them high and dry, but I think it's very important to say no to the things that matter least, back into
Hmm.
Covey's stuff, because the things that matter most, which is that wonderful book, the 5 Regrets of the Dying, is
Mm.
always a very, very powerful one, and it stuck with me. Um, but mainly, I wish I'd been living a life true to myself. I wish I'd, not done what other people wanted me to do, but really done what really was my calling. And there's various things in there, but certainly friends and family. What about you,
Yeah.
David? What
Yeah,
resonates?
there's I think my wife and I, we have 4 children as well. And when they're, the first three are very close together. Now they're in their 20s and late teens, but I think the expression that we learned was out of the Old Testament. There was a saying called, I am doing a great work and cannot come down. And as we learned about our kids, there's so many things that you'd like to do because your career tends to go up when your children's life is also getting the most important and they need the dad the most. And so learning to say no to things, which is very difficult. It was, so we had this expression of, hey, I am doing a great work with my kids. I need to be intentional with my wife and my family. This is so, so, so important that we had to, put some guardrails in our lives to make sure that we weren't going overboard in one way or the other, because you want to stay on point with those things that are, when you look back, that's going to be the most important thing you ever did.
Yeah, yeah. Time and again, it's not work-life balance; it's work non-work balance.
Mm,
Um,
yeah.
because or sort of it's really about if you're living a life that's on purpose, like I'm very lucky to be doing this work with you and with other CEOs,
Hmm.
coaching them, running offsites around the world in America and Germany and Europe. I find it very fulfilling. And I managed to mix in the time with my wife and my children, and got another grandchild. My daughter Bryony is about to produce a grandchild in August. it's all very special time, and no one on the deathbed said, "Wish I spent longer in the office." They don't
Indeed.
say that. They
Indeed.
they
No.
go, like my father was killed when I was 2.5, and I would give anything to have some time with him.
Hmm.
Just like I didn't spend time with him, and many people, I say to them, "You're alive.
Yeah,
You're alive, but you're not with your children."
that's right.
Because you're a workaholic and you're going, oh, there's so much to do and I've got to do. No, you don't have to do all this. You're choosing to do all this.
Yeah.
And I do think we should be frequently challenged by a mentor or a coach or someone who goes, have you got things in the right order? And time and again, people who, come home and the marriage is over because they haven't been there. And I've learned that
That's right. You see these
hard
people,
way.
they sort of get to the retirement age and they're like, their kids are no longer around and they don't want to be around. And they're kind of staring at their spouse saying, I'm not really sure, did I ever meet you before? And
Yeah, yeah.
because they didn't sort of invest in that sort of priority time all along the way.
No, I think it's something you can't belittle. And what do you value as a CEO, and how do you empower and elevate? And this is what Stephen Covey was good when he was on episode
Mm,
299. This whole idea of trust and inspire to lift people up so that you are sharing out the workload, and the leader isn't getting everybody to upward delegate to them. And I think there's a bit of a problem, particularly those who love control will hang on to everything and everybody will
yeah.
delegate to them. They go, I'm so busy, they need me. No, no, you're making yourself indispensable.
Hmm.
But that's not helpful for the family. Um, in your life, you've had lots of different experience. So was there a dark moment from which you learnt something which has served you well since?
Yeah, I would say out certainly the death of my father is probably the one that I would point to the most. And then, yeah, I mean, if I go back, it's sort of there were two aspects. Hindsight, it was actually I hate the timing, I hate what happened, but it did sort of shape me to who I am today on how I think about life, my dad was 51 when he died.
Mm.
And I remember at the time thinking, God, he was so old.
Yeah.
I'm now 53, almost 54, and I'm
Right.
thinking, I feel so young. And I lost him. So, hindsight 2020, obviously. But I think ultimately what that taught me was it set me on a journey where I needed to go figure myself out without a lot of input from my dad, and had to go seek the wisdom, wise counsel of other men that I respected. So it forced me to go into, hey, I need to be mentored. I need to be coached. And I was so fortunate to get some guys that were really open to doing that for me, that were really strong leaders, that had similar values and perspectives on life. And that sort of sent me into, I think, a really hard time, developmental time, but it also made me better for who I am today.
Yeah. And you had a sort of fascinating time. You're also involved, as you were saying, with the world of banking, Merrill Lynch, Bank of America, BillingTree.
Mhm.
Tell me a bit about that world. How did you get yourself into that world, and how did that lead on to this?
Yeah, if you were to sort of broadly sort of split my career, first third, I was doing sort of consulting work. So I did some sales work, and then I get into a little bit of management consulting. I went to grad school, and then after that, while I was in consulting, I got into the CEO business.
Hmm.
And my first job was an opportunity with a founder. It started a company called Equity Methods that we did software for employee stock option valuation, which is just think of it as a technical finance application for an emerging problem. And that was the gentleman I mentioned earlier, one of my heroes. And that business went from 3 people to 60 people in 2 years. We were right, great product, great market, great timing. And we sold that to Merrill Lynch right before the financial crisis hit in 2008. And that's when I went on to Merrill Lynch and I stayed there to run that platform for, I think it was almost 4 years. Yeah, about 4 years where I stayed on and ran. And this is, you go from a very, very small company to, I don't know how many employees, probably a couple 100,000 employees at the time. That was a massive transition for me. But that's also where I met some other great leaders along the way too.
Yes, and you would have met some great leaders, but also it does have its share of the sort of Wolf of Wall Street characters in
Yes,
places like Bank of America, Merrill Lynch. I know because I've met them. Uh,
yes.
and how do you think that is so? Is it because it's the rewards, the financial rewards are so high, it
Yeah.
draws in it's more than its fair share of the dare I even say the white collar psychopaths because
Indeed. Yeah, I think
yeah,
what I learned because I
money.
worked a lot with the financial advisors. They were sort of my customer, if you will, because they would sell our services to corporations and then they would work with the executives. If you're going to be successful, and they at Merrill Lynch, they call it the thundering herd. I mean, this is a group of very hard charging, very independent, and they want to win and they want to compete, and the rewards are spectacular if done well. And so you inherently have these very, you know, reasonably sharp elbowed individuals that are willing to do what it takes to make things happen. And I think that's where those caricatures come from.
Yeah. And for someone with that Southern Baptist and strong faith that your father had, didn't you find it at times some of their values would jar
Mhm.
with yours and you go, whoa, how are you acting in that way?
Yeah.
Just because you want the Ferrari, you're prepared to sell all these mortgage-backed securities, which
Yes.
say they're AAA rating when they're actually D's. How did you square
Yeah,
that one?
it's a really good question because ultimately that's kind of why I left. When I left Bank of America, I didn't have a job waiting for me. I just had gotten a bit of exhausted with the behavior of the some of the people that I had to work with because I thought it was just, candle. It wasn't uh, in alignment with how I wanted to treat people. And certainly, do unto others as you would have them do unto you. And if I'm eventually you can only hold on to that for so long where you're like, hey, I might start sacrificing my own values because that
Correct.
may be the only way to survive. And so through a lot of conversation with my wife, I decided, this is just not for me anymore. And so I left. And oddly enough, I was going to take some time off and had a random circumstance that called, and I got an opportunity to go be a CEO of another company, by like 12 weeks later. So it turned out to be a good thing, but it did teach me that, um, when you build a company that has the values alignment, uh, boy, if the values aren't clear, and two, if they're not, both encouraged and enforced, meaning you need to celebrate the people that do it well, and you need to make sure the people that don't adhere to those values recognize that they're out around, I think is an important developmental step for leaders because when people don't share values, it can be a real drag on the organization.
Yeah. And personally in my own life, I made a call at one stage to resign and leave an organization because I found their values were underwhelming and
Mm,
didn't sit with mine. I didn't like the way the organization was going. And I think you have to make a stand on it. Otherwise, you're selling your soul, literally selling your soul. And I do see people too often that they go, oh, well, I got to pay the mortgage and this kind of stuff. No, there's got to be another way. So I'm pleased that you made the call. Um,
mhm.
Thinking about values and what I call moral quotient, what did you learn when you did let your own values slip? Because there will have been occasions, I know I've done with
Oh
mine.
yeah.
What did you learn
Usually
and
what
how
it
did you get back on track, really?
Yeah, I don't look back and say that in any time in my work I had a real what I would call an integrity breach, meaning I did something that was illegal or really outside of the rules. It always came back to how I treated people, which I think part of my values is to treat people with kindness and clarity and to really honor other people and relationships. And what I would say is that when I got under stress, and under sort of an ongoing sort of battling with other people that didn't treat people fairly, you find yourself acting more. You sort of start acting like them. You find yourself slipping in that regard, and the way you talk to people, your temperament or temper, the word choice you use, and that's when I started to realize it. I mean, candidly, it took me longer than it probably should have, where because the rewards are so good, it's hard to sort of balance that. But I think what I found eventually, my wife was like, you're not really, you sort of called me out a little bit, I think at one point, and said, what's going on? Because you don't seem the same as you were when you were independent from this company. What's going on? And I think that started a process of me saying it's time to move on.
Yeah, and there's a lovely poem about it from a Yorkshireman here in England called The Man in the Mirror. And it's this
Hmm.
going to the mirror and looking at yourself. And do you like what you see, how
Hmm.
you're behaving and who you're being? And I know in my 62 years, there have been occasions when I've metaphorically looked in the mirror and I thought, I don't like how I'm treating people or behaving. This is not how I want to be. And I've learned a lot from that. And part of my journey of doing various things, like going on this retreat to do a lot of meditation, and also doing the Hoffman process, which is a fabulous one started by a guy in California, was
Hmm.
about looking at your values and your behaviors, which are influenced from your childhood, and how are you acting, and what kind of mask are you putting on? Are you being really authentic to yourself? And it's a lifetime journey, and I think we've got to work on
Indeed.
that. Thinking about a lifetime journey, let's take you back to the future in your DeLorean, back to when young David Roberts was 16 to 18 years old. What advice would you give to a young person that age, 16 to 18? This matters and this doesn't. What would you say does
Oh,
matter and what doesn't?
yeah, I think the a lot of my goals. My dad, one of the stories I love to tell about my dad was at Thanksgiving every year, not at Christmas or at New Year's, we had to have our goals for the next year written on a 3x5 card. At Thanksgiving, he wanted us to get a head start. And there is a level of where those goals get pretty, it's all about you. Your goals tend to be, hey, I want to run $100 million company, or I want to run a marathon, I don't know, whatever it is. And those are okay. Um, I think what I would tell myself is don't put so much pressure on yourself on this performance wheel, because it is a never ending and candidly never ultimately fulfilling cycle, that it needs to be balanced with an others orientation, meaning spend some of your time, energy, and effort on the behalf of others, not just for making yourself more wealthy or more famous or more fit. Find ways to do have a mindset of that. And can it just took me too long to figure that out. That would be something I would go back and say, hey, it's not about you all the time.
Yes, it's a really good point. I mean, there is that element of you need to sort yourself out by way of your health and your fitness so you can look after your family and others, and you won't be a drag on society and the health system. Um, and at the same time, it's not about you. It never was about you. And,
Yeah.
and this is where it's so very interesting about, I'm not going to become a Buddhist, but just listening about this whole thing of the Buddha and suffering. And many of our unhappiness in life is caused by craving things that we don't really need and we want more of it, or
Yep.
aversion to things that we really need to face into and we have to do, but we don't like it. And this recognition of impermanence, that things are always changing, nothing staying the same. But a lot of our agonies are over railing against things that are changing that we don't want to change. We want to keep it the
Yeah.
same.
Yeah.
But recognizing that, our lives will be over and I want to have a good life and a good death because I know I'm going to die. So,
Yeah.
but to go and be missed, not that thank God he's gone. What an awful person he was.
Yeah.
And that I think, as you say, it is about the difference we make to the people around us, that we have left uh, a world where we have made a difference to the lives of some other people, whether it's your four children and your wife,
Yeah. Absolutely. Yeah.
or your colleagues, 1,900 people. This is why I love working with leaders like you, that if I can help you improve the lives of 1,900 people by the way you
Mhm.
lead them, that's been a useful use of my life.
Absolutely.
And that,
Yeah.
that's really living life on purpose. Let's talk about that. Purpose. What gives
Yeah.
your life meaning and purpose? It's the
Yeah.
PQ as we talk about it.
Yeah, I mean, as I've mentioned before, I grew up in a faith-based home and have developed my own faith in God, and I think that is that's the cornerstone of how I look and shape the world. That's my context and philosophy is faith in God, and so that has a lot to do with how, I mean, candidly, how I treat people, what my ambition in life is, the priorities that I place in my life all sort of need to run through that filter. And it's, it is an ever progressing view, because as you get older, you have different, more mature views of God. But I think that's been something that's been really paramount in how for sure, it has shaped how I lead and lead even today.
Yeah, and I find the whole thing fascinating. I did a ride for Unity recently where I was with a mixture of different people from um, where were they from? Beirut and from
Hmm.
Israel and from Egypt and from the UAE and from America and from Britain, from Italy. We're all together, all from these different nations. And many of us had strong faiths. But I thought, if only we could use faith for good
Yeah,
rather than for killing others. I'm not going to die for my faith, but I'm going to make you die for your faith or for my
exactly.
faith. And
Yep.
like, can we make faith something which is a force for good, not for a force for slaughtering the other side or power grab of another country or wiping people out or
Hmm.
terrorist atrocities, whatever it is. And that's always the greatest sadness for me, how faith, and particularly fundamentalism, whether it be Christian or Muslim or Hindu or whatever it is, people will do some dreadful things in the name of faith. And
Indeed.
so we've got to make sure that they well, we just got to be aware of that. It's a long
Yeah.
topic. We won't go
Yeah,
into.
there's a great expression. As I think about my faith, there's a gentleman that coined this by the name of Andy Stanley. He says that uh, specifically, he says faith in Jesus will make your life better and make you better at life.
Yeah,
And that's a way that I like to think about it. I agree with you that most of the times we see in the world these wars and things like that, those are probably so far afield from whatever faith that it is that originated, that it's unfortunate that people take it that way. But for me, it has made my life more fulfilling, more purpose driven. And, I think the friends and community with which I involve are people that I really love and respect, and we share that same sense of sort of value and faith.
yeah, and that leads me nicely, this whole idea of finding a life that's fulfilling and purpose driven. That does help your health and not your longevity. Because if you
Yeah.
look at any of the research, people who don't have a sense of meaning and purpose in their life, don't really know what they're doing. They're just, in a job to pay the mortgage. They are going to die younger than those who are really feeling that they are contributing to society, to their colleagues, their friends, doing work that is meaningful. Which the whole area of health, well-being, mental health,
Hmm.
physical health. What are your tips? I mean, David, you're 53. You look in very good health. You're a sort of role model to us all here. And what is it that in your routine, your tips and techniques to keep yourself mentally
Yeah.
and physically healthy?
I have, yeah, physical fitness. I'm not a person that you have to convince to go to the gym. I love going. I like to do physical exercise, and I try to keep it varied. So um I'm a bit, if you've read James Clear's Atomic
Uh-huh.
Habits,
Atomic Habits, yeah.
yeah, it's a great book. And one of the things it taught me was basically habits beat goals every single time, because winners and losers have the same goals, but the person who has the right habits is going to be the winner. And so, in that, when I have been fortunate, and I knock on wood there, that I have just had the habit of, I'm an early riser, so I wake up early,
When you say
and
early, you're American. You see, I mean, like I think early is 7, but for American, it can be
oh
like
yeah, no,
4:30.
I'm up usually before 5 a.m.
Yeah, I thought you might be. Yeah.
Most days, yeah. And that allows me some time to sort of have quiet and some in time of meditation and reflection. And then I'll go to the gym, or I like this new thing I've discovered, rucking. You would probably know this.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, it's
Tell
like
people about rucking. This
yeah,
sounds like a lot of fun.
it's kind of my new favorite. I live in Arizona, so there's mountains everywhere. When we say mountains, they would probably be glorified hills. They're not giant mountains. And the concept of rucking is you put weight in a backpack and walk or hike, and that's it. It's very simple. But as I'm 53 now and I have a bad back, running is no longer a real option for me. But this is something that, it sounds counterintuitive, but it actually it strengthens your core and your back, because you're carrying this weight in a specific position. So it's actually good for your back, and it gets you outside. No phone, no headphones, just you, and just let your mind run. And it's real, and it's a real workout. I really enjoy it.
Well, I'm smiling here that people won't see unless they're watching on YouTube, but because as I did my training for airborne selection in the army,
Oh, I'll bet you did a lot of it.
I did a lot of rucking. And what would happen is we'd have 55 pounds of kit
Oh my goodness.
in our rucksack, and your helmet and your rifle as well. And often you'd be putting bricks in there, things. But of course, it was the day when you had these terrible old A-frame, metal framed
Oh my
rucksack with a bit of
goodness.
a band on just around your kidneys, which probably did your kidneys untold damage as it bounced along. But you wouldn't walk. You'd often run up these hills and down again. And my only claim to fame is I still hold the world record for the Cyprus Double Mountain Marathon, where I ran up a
Oh my
six
goodness.
and a half thousand foot mountain with a team of two other colleagues, and we won it in the end. The first year we came third, and the second year we won it and set the record. Um, but there was so much running with backpacks, and that
Yes,
was what
yes.
that was required too. So to do this as a hobby now, when it was like
And it's kind
a
of
way of
a,
life.
yeah, if you, Jonathan, if you saw the backpacks now, they're specific. They have little slots that you put weight plates in. It's
Yeah.
very tight. It's not, I can't even imagine doing it in an A-frame the way you described it. This is
Oh,
a
this
much
sounds
easier way to do it for
this
sure.
sounds much more sensible, and I'm sure much better on your back. Um, Emotional intelligence
Yeah.
is something which struck me how much you have of this. I meet CEOs who are often the smartest man in the room, but they haven't kind of worked out to make the room smarter. Uh,
Mm.
how do you listen well to others? What's your skill in listening and emotional intelligence? What tip would you give?
Yeah, I think what I learned from one of my mentors on that is one, I'm very aware that I'm not the smartest person in the room. My dad used to tease me and call me the C plus poster boy. Uh, I just was never an academic giant in any way, shape, or form. I think I'm a guy, I can hold my own, but I'm not going to be the smartest guy in the room.
Yeah,
And
like that.
but I also developed sort of a curiosity, and that curiosity shows up as questions. And what I have found is really good leaders, especially when they're the point leader, if they can, questions are such a powerful, candidly, it's a culture setter, which is I'm willing to listen. One, if you're asking a lot of questions, people are going to show up prepared, which is good. It's going to allow to let other people talk. You learn more about how other people think. It allows you to probe deeply. Because the other thing is, as the CEO, if I come into meetings and I start making statements, it can really shut people up. And the best answer doesn't show up in the room if I'm doing all the talking. So if you've ever, there's a movie here in the US called Hoosiers. It's an old movie about a basketball team, and Gene Hackman is the coach. And his rule was you got to pass the ball 5 times before you take a shot. Because these guys were young kids, they wanted to go take a shot and get all the glory. You pass the ball 5 times. So one of the things I still do this a little bit is I try to ask 5 questions in every meeting before I make a statement. And I think that it just tunes you into a different mindset than going. Now, look, there's sometimes where I got to come in and say, hey guys, here's what's going on. And that does happen. But 80% of the meetings I have is I'm there to listen and observe and ask questions and not to necessarily throw my opinion down.
I love that, and I wish more CEOs would do that.
Yeah.
There is too much of a tendency to be the know-all and know more than anybody else about anything, and to speak at speed and to not take people with them, but just to be
Mhm.
driven. And they love urgency and firefighting and a crisis. And I was reading Walter Isaacson's book on Steve Jobs, but then he also has done one on Elon Musk.
Yes,
And
great book.
Musk would love, lying under the desk and having pizza at 4 in the morning, but not sleeping until it's all done, to get the rocket there. And you go, yeah, once in a while you could do that, but to have that as a culture where it's firefighting, it's not healthy for anybody.
No.
They're gonna have some lives. Um, Let me pick one on resilience, which is
Yeah.
linked to that one. How have you picked yourself up in times of adversity?
Yeah. I mean, I think if when I was in seventh grade, again, I never won an academic award in my life, not one academic award ever, but I got this award called the Determination Award. And for some reason along the way, I developed and I think this was through my dad, just this concept of you don't have to finish first, but you have to finish. And I think that's been helpful when I've gone through different aspects of my career where whether that was, here, I mean, there are innumerous numbers of challenges that I've been here 10 years now. We went from a private company to a private equity company, from private equity to public. And along the way, there's just many different times where things did not break my way. It's very, very stressful for whatever the circumstances notwithstanding. And I think the one thing that I have learned is that, slow and steady can win the race. I don't have to overreact necessarily. There's sometimes where you need to overreact for sure. But in general, just keep moving forward. And I think things will do that. And the way I do that, again, I go back to my faith. I have a great wife that is very supportive and can be encouraging. And hopefully you have a great team that you can, collaborate with when those things happen.
Yeah, I do love your dad's quote. You don't have to finish first, but you do have to finish.
Yeah.
And again, coming because it's front of mind for me next week on the 5th, I'm going to be going on this 11 days of a silent retreat. And each day is 10 hours of meditation. Now, the most I've done one go is an hour.
Yeah.
They kind of are letting me bring my stool because I'm getting a bit stiff in my old age, rather than sitting in the lotus position where I think I'd be in agony after 10 hours of that.
Oh, wow.
But the point is, I can be quite certain there'll be days like I think day 3 and day 4, day 5. You begin to think, why am I here? I just want to get out of here. But actually, I am gonna, because I've done a lot like you, long distance running and things like that. I'm gonna stick it out. But I know there'll be moments when I'm thinking,
Oh,
well, why did I say I was going to do this? Well, like,
indeed.
what am I doing? But as you say, you have to finish, you have to see it through. And I think again back to perhaps an army moment where we're on this a thing called Long Valley, and it was a muddy tank tracked, goo up to about your ankles, certainly almost occasionally if you stood in the wrong puddle up to your knee, and you're going along there with your 55 pounds of kit and your helmet and your rifle, and the instructors are yelling at you because this is part of the selection process. And the officers have to go back and get the soldiers who are lagging, and the officers almost do double the distance. And I was going back to encourage this young gunner, and the instructor, who was a corporal who hated officers, said, "Carry his pack, sir," in the way that shows utter disdain for me. I go, but staff, I've already got my pack. He said, "Don't argue with me. Carry his pack as well as your pack." Well, you can't put both on your back, so I've got one on the front.
Yeah.
And one on the back. And I
Oh
am
my
not
gosh.
running at this stage. I mean,
Yeah, of
like, I
course.
cannot run.
Oh my goodness.
110 pounds of kit, and I'm like 8 miles into this 10-mile run, and he just goes to me, "Give up. You're a complete loser. You're never going to make it. You're not good
Yeah.
enough to be airborne. Just accept it. There's a wagon behind. Just get on the wagon. Just almost like ring the bell. Just admit you've lost." And I say, "No, thank you. I'm going to keep going." And I just kept going. It mustn't have been for more than about another 300 meters. And he could tell I wasn't going to give up. And he was really
Hmm.
annoyed. And so he called back the guy and said, "Take your pack and go and catch the group." But I was pretty broken by that stage, but I just kept going. So I think resilience, and you don't have to finish first, but you have to finish. Talking of finishing, we're coming to the end.
Yeah.
David, I'd love to hear from you about how you've turned around toxic teams. You must have had, certainly in banking, you would have come across toxicity and individuals whose, as we discussed, values you found quite unpalatable. But what do you do when you've got an individual or a team that's gone bad and you need to turn it around? What's your top tip?
Yeah. I mean, when I came to this organization 10 years ago, it wasn't as much toxic as it was just not performing.
Yeah.
And some of that was related to values and toxicity, but some of it was just misalignment of skill and what the business needed. So again, as we were talking earlier, you need to fire fast and hire slow. And I think what I remember when I first came into the organization, I went to the founder and he had sort of empowered me. He was a really, really great founder, guy by the name of Jim Tootin. And I fired the entire sales team of one of our businesses in one day. And he's like, what are you doing? I said, look, you'll never notice a difference. I promise you. Because these were people that were doing some things that were inappropriate. There was some toxicity there, and there were some performance issues. And no one, never in the history of this happened where I got rid of an entire team and sales actually went up. It was it was an unbelievable. Um, so I think ultimately, as the point leader, it is my responsibility to set the direction and the expectation of behaviors. And when people are outside of that, you have to be very quick to adjust, especially on behaviors, because um, people always give me their best pitch. They're always going to behave the way they think I want them to behave. But it's if you're finding out outside of that it's happening, you got to lean into that quick because the impact in the culture is just too big.
Mm.
So it's clear expectations on both performance and behaviors, and then constant feedback against that and measuring to it.
Yeah, great advice. Wonderful. I am enjoying this conversation with you, and I
Yeah.
find so many shared values that we have.
Mhm.
You have we discussed a favorite book that you
Yeah.
mentioned to me, which I'm gonna buy after this. As a dyslexic, I'm gonna listen to it. I hope there's an audio version of it. But just tell everybody what the book is and why you recommend it.
Yeah, the book that I love reading, that was another thing my dad gave me, is the expression leaders are readers.
Mm.
My Probably one of my all-time favorite books is Team of Rivals by Doris Kearns Goodwin. It's the story of how Abraham Lincoln navigated the the legislative or Congress in a time of the Civil War, as well as the sort of the emancipation of slaves. And this was a guy that he just showed such deft leadership of high purpose, high in sticking to it, but how to bring people along and lean into that. He was a master leader in that regard. And it's super well written and really, really interesting. It's a really compelling story from American history. That's why I like it so much.
No, that's lovely. The combination of leadership and history is
Yeah,
going to be
indeed.
in my
Indeed.
sweet spot again.
Yeah.
Great, thank you for that. So, would you introduce who you are? This is for
Mhm.
the final moment, and also for your top tip. Say the what your business does, and give us your top tip as a
Sure.
leader.
Yeah. My name is David Roberts. I'm the CEO of Verra Mobility. We are a global leader in smart mobility. We have a portfolio of businesses that work with customers on making mobility safer and easier. And my top tip is an acronym called FCA: Focus, Clarity, and Accountability. And as leaders, to me, it is very, very important that focus is critical, meaning what are the most important things we need to do, and making sure that not only are we doing those things, but not doing the things that aren't on that list is a real important criteria for leaders. And then you have to supply clarity, which is what is that focus? How are we going to achieve that focus? Does everyone know what their role is in achieving those objectives? And then ultimately accountability, which a lot of leaders can struggle with, is making sure people are performing to the level of the expectations of what the top priorities are.
I do love that FCA. I'm going to unashamedly attribute it to you, but I'm going to make use of it. Focus, clarity, and accountability.
Yeah.
David, it has been an absolute joy having you on the Inspiring Leadership podcast. You fit the bill of one of our inspiring leaders. And
Thank
thank
you.
you very much for sharing your life story, your wisdom, your experience. And I wish you every success with your business.
Well, Jonathan, it was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me. And thank you for what you're doing with this podcast. It's great.
Okay. Thanks, David. Bye.
All right.